President Obama's evolution on gay marriage, and this week telling the New Yorker, quote, in this piece, he told me that he now believes the Constitution requires all states to allow same-sex marriage, an argument that his administration has not yet made before the Supreme Court. Quote, ultimately, I think the Equal Protection Clause does guarantee same-sex marriage in all 50 states. We're back with the panel. Charles.
Look, once you get into this constitutional right defense of gay marriage, which is not necessary, it's one way to argue it, then I think you're likely to infringe on the religious rights. There is a case I think we're going to talk about in
Idaho.
In Idaho,
ordained ministers who've refused to marry gay couples, and they may be breaking the city's anti-discrimination law.
Right, and that is going to happen inevitably if it's a constitutional right. In one of the early decisions, the one that overturned Prop 8, one of the early pro-gay marriage decisions, it said the only reason to oppose it was prejudice. Whereas I think there are a lot of religious folks for whom it's a belief system, it's a tradition, and it's a religious obligation, one man and one woman. Once you define it as a right, and once you say anybody who's against it is acting only out of bias or prejudice, then you are going to be trampling on the religious rights of a whole lot of people, and that I think is where this thing is going, and that's why I think the president is imprudent in talking about it as a right. It should be something that the society decides perhaps ought to be allowed, but once you define it as a right, you have overridden a long tradition and many millions of people who believe otherwise.
It's clear that the issue has evolved. As the president's evolved, he may evolve faster than America is evolving, but it is changing in polls and perceptions. But as far as the Constitution and how you read that on this issue, I think that that's pretty interesting.
I think it raises a lot of questions. Why now? I mean, he's not running for office again. This is not going to galvanize a big teeming mass of voters on November 4th for the Democrats. It was just so interesting that he was, really a student of the Constitution himself, a professor, would come out now and say he believes now, suddenly, that he has a new interpretation of the Constitution and it's a right. It's just very interesting on the timing and what he is aiming at.
You talked about earlier, he's making all these calls to African-American radio stations and African-American groups. There are a lot of African-American communities who have a real problem with the gay marriage issue. Yeah. Overall, so right. It's almost like he's fighting two,
toggling between interest groups. Well, this is basically, in short, a summation of the modern Democratic Party, right? Look, I think Charles is right on what this might do to popular opinion on gay marriage. I don't think it's wise, if you're a gay marriage proponent, the fight that you don't want to have at this point, as gay marriage seems to be gaining acceptance across the country, is a fight about government compulsion of private, churches or privately held corporations or businesses to perform marriage ceremonies. That's not a winning argument, I think, if you're a gay marriage proponent. But I do think that there are people who have made the argument, have made the argument that the Equal Protection Clause, that you can basically say the Equal Protection Clause provides the right for for gays to marry, but also doesn't require the government to compel others to perform the ceremony. That's Ilya Shapiro at the Cato Institute and others make that argument.
But it's heading to the Supreme Court.
Yes, and it'll be their decision as to whether it's a right or not, and I think it would be a big mistake to go ahead and to be that sweeping and uncompromising.